I'm the director for Enterprise Community Partners Resiliency and Recovery work around the nation. We are so happy that you can join us today on this most auspicious of occasions, June 1st, 2020, the beginning of Atlantic hurricane season. And we know that this hurricane season has been a season much different than any other. Today, we will be joined by esteemed colleagues that work in indoor air quality and mold abatement and resiliency to discuss one of the most critical issues that we're going to be facing coming into this hurricane season, which is the ability to mitigate mold and moisture control for our homes. I'd like to take you through the program today, but I'm going to start with introducing Enterprise Community Partners. We are a national nonprofit that works across the United States and in affiliated territories to create opportunity for low and moderate income communities by preserving and building and funding affordable housing. And we work across the country with many diverse communities, and many of our communities are facing incredible risk, not just around flood season, but fires and earthquakes and tornadoes, in addition to the ongoing risks that we're facing as a nation at this time. Enterprise Community Partners has been working in housing resiliency, recovery, and rebuilding for over 15 years. And we know that these events are as much about housing preservation as anything. Every single event we've been engaged with deeply has been an event that has incurred losses to housing. Hurricane Katrina, where we lost 800,000 homes, through Superstorm Sandy and the storms of 2017, starting with Harvey. Later, going to Irma and Hurricane Maria, where there were almost 370,000 homes lost, and then the fires in California, of course. And now, as we move into 2020, we're going to be expecting an incredibly volatile season. And we know how important it is to make sure that our homes are safe. Enterprise Community Partners supports communities in a variety of ways. We have 3 levers that we work with to ensure that our communities are safe and resilient. We work to support policies that encourage housing to be built in a resilient way and funding to be created to support housing resiliency. We create solutions by standing up technical assistance programs, developing guidance with tools that will allow for our communities to be able to access the best-in-class resources to help them move forward and mitigate impacts. And we deploy capital through grant funding, loans, and investment into our communities so that our communities are stronger and safer. We are at a very important juncture in our nation's history. Never before has our nation witnessed and experienced the kind of impacts that COVID has caused us to lose millions and millions of jobs around our nation, to force homes and community members to shelter in place at this time. 50 states around the nation have asked for and demanded sheltering in place. And so many of our community members and households have been living at home, quarantined and sheltered for months. This means that our houses have had to be stronger and safer. And as we move into a season of great volatility, many, many millions of households will still be sheltering in place and will be at home and will demand and necessitate that a indoor air quality is achieved and that people can live safely in their homes without toxins, without mold. It's worth noting that there are millions and millions of Americans that are also not living in homes. They're on the streets. They're living in congregate shelters. They're homeless and they're displaced. And they too will have to make sure that while they find a home, but that our homes are safe and sound and toxin-free. And this is one of the reasons why today is so important. And our webinar is so important today, because we need to know how to recognize impacts to our indoor air quality, how to recognize mold and mildew and other items and health conditions that will cause great impacts to our households. We're looking at a hurricane season in 2020 that is quite volatile. As many of you have been experiencing incredible heat around the nation for the last several months. For many of us in the Northeast, winter was really a non-event. We have a warming that's occurring, and this is going to impact our hurricane season. Already, according to NOAA and AccuWeather, 14 to 18 storms have been named. 7 to 9 of those are considered hurricanes. 2 to 4 are considered major hurricanes, which is above a Cat 3. And the impacts at this time will be severe because so many of us are sheltering in place. And there's so much attention being delivered for COVID, and the capacity of our volunteer network and the capacity of our first responders has been stretched and stressed. So it is critical that you listening on this webinar can relay to your clients and to your partners the importance of having the eye on indoor air quality. We know that moisture impacting homes and moisture impacting communities creates a lot of impacts to health, that the spread of illness and the disease created in the wake of natural disasters can be incredibly taxing for communities. We know that heavy rain and flooding can create conditions for vectors like mosquitoes that can cause additional risks like malaria or a dengue fever. We know that moisture can lead to viral load creation. We know that particulates created from fires can trigger asthma events. There is a direct link between climate and natural hazard events and disease and health. And what we are going to be discussing today is how to mitigate some of the impacts from precipitation as one particular stream of need. Enterprise Community Partners is producing this webinar in partnership with the National Center for Healthy Housing, as well as Livable Housing Incorporated and the Environmental Protection Agency, to deliver to you some of the best-in-class information that we have at the ready. We're excited to share with you today the unveiling of the new Guide to Healthy Housing by the National Center for Healthy Housing. And this series is part of our Keep Safe series, which we've launched this summer, starting with today. And this Keep Safe series centers around an initiative we developed with partners in Puerto Rico after Maria. We created a book on how to build resilient and safe housing in island communities with many partners around Puerto Rico and the States. And this book is available to you digitally in Spanish as well as in English. And it runs through 9 areas that an individual has to think about when they want to build and design resilient homes. And the 9 areas that we feature in the book start with the sequencing of building housing in accordance with resilience standards. We start with an introduction of how to assess your risk for vulnerability. Then we move into how do you make sure that your site is safeguarded should there be storms or mudslides or a range of conditions. Then we move into how to safeguard and fortify your home in the event of in the event of a natural hazard. Then we move into passive habitability, which is a set of strategies aimed at helping a person deal with the loss of power in their home and how to design a building to sustain that power loss. And the mold strategies you will be hearing today about are part of this idea of sustaining your building without power and making sure that it's able to be livable should you have loss of this utility. And engaging and mitigating mold is a critical area of passive habitability. Then we move into a whole section of a series of strategies on energy generation. This includes solar thermal and photovoltaic. Then we move into a series of strategies on water management, where we talk about safe septic and safe potable water reuse. We move into household preparedness, which are strategies that everyone on this call should be looking at how to engage today. Then finally, we conclude with community engagement, how to engage community. And then the last chapter is on how do you pay for this permit these strategies and put them together. And before I turn over to our team today, I want to point out that moisture equals mold. When you have moisture coming into your home through cracks that have been created through age or resettling, or anchorage and windows that have not been sealed correctly, or seams and fissures in your walls or on your foundation or on your roof, you allow your home to be exposed to spores which create mold. And mold can quickly cycle out of control. Mold is, as we'll hear from Armand, visible and invisible. It can create significant respiratory problems for youth and folks with immune compromised systems. And especially in today's climate where everyone is nervous about COVID, everyone is inside their home worried. We're dealing with incredible challenges from this virus that has not yet been rectified. We need to pay attention to the health and safety of our homes and the indoor air quality. So with further ado, I'd like to now introduce our esteemed speakers. I'd like to first introduce Amisha Mehta Sampath, who is the Director for Indoor Air Quality for the Environmental Protection Agency. And we're so grateful she can join us today. Then we're gonna introduce our dear colleague, Jonathan Wilson, who is the Director for the National Center for Healthy Housing and has been the voice behind the guide for mold remediation in healthy homes, a cleanup guide for contractors for mold since Hurricane Katrina when he started this initiative. And then finally, moving to our dear friend and colleague, Armand Magnelli, who will walk us through the steps that we need to think about to ensure a healthy and safe home. I'd like to now turn over to Amisha Mehta Sampath. We have many people online. We are streaming on Facebook and we are we've got tweeting going on the Twitterverse. Without further ado, Amisha, please take it away. And as Amisha is setting up her audio, the chat function is open, so feel free to chat. Where are you from? And any questions you have or comments.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to Enterprise Community and Lori and all the others for giving us an opportunity to speak with you today about mold and mold remediation. So a disaster occurs. What are the main issues? Lori's actually touched upon most of them. But remember, because we're in this COVID pandemic, it's considered a dual disaster if there's a flooding issue, hurricane, etc. And some of the main health issues related that we need to look at in an integrative manner are mold, asthma, potential lead, and asbestos exposure. So when we address mold remediation in a home, in a building, in a school, you always have to think about that lead could be present, asbestos could be present, and so that the workers and the people that you employ must be knowledgeable about how to remediate this safely. This also creates a need for strategic environmental workforce training. Why is it paused?
Amisha, could you go to the full screen so we can see the screen?
Can you not see it? This is so embarrassing. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so one of the main fact sheets that EPA developed, it's called Recover After Flooding. So it's a fact sheet that focuses on flood cleanup and the air in your home. Most important fact here, key point is the generator exhaust is toxic, and we must always ensure that we put our generators outside, well away from doors, windows, and vents. There are 2 public service announcements that are available, both in English and Spanish, that talk about the health effects of carbon monoxide. Other technical resources available are on flood cleanup and indoor air quality. There's flood cleanup and protecting indoor air quality fact sheet. Whenever a hurricane or any type of natural disaster occurs, there's always the issue is how do we manage the debris? You need to check with your local government and what is available to you where you live. There are some links provided here about disaster debris planning, managing appliances with the refrigerants, dealing with debris in damaged buildings. And another important tool is the EPA Incident Waste Decision Support Tool, which provides access to technical information, regulations, and guidance to work through waste management issues to ensure that there's safe and efficient removal. We know that mold and stress, again, both factors are high in demand during disasters, are triggers for asthma. So how do we clean up mold after a natural disaster? There are some tools available through NIOSH's program, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. It's called the Dampness and Mold Assessment Tool for Schools and General Buildings. Many of you who might be on the call are contractors, so this would be an important tool to access as you go around your municipality or your area to assess the mold damage within your building. There are other links on EPA's website that talk about mold cleanup. We know that the key to mold control is moisture control. After the flood, remove standing water and dry indoor areas. Remove and discard anything that has been wet for more than 24 to 48 hours. Additional links are provided as well. There are recent technical webinars that were given by Dr. Jean Cole. They are very focused on flood damaged homes. One is approaches to effective decontamination, cleaning and drying, and the other one is a general flood cleanup webinar. Two other publications, which are titled Mold Remediation in Schools and Commercial Buildings and Mold, Worker and Employer Guide to Hazards and Recommended Controls. The first one was issued by EPA. The second one was jointly issued by OSHA, the National Institutes of Health, as well as HUD. And both of those guidelines, both of these informational sources provide specific guidelines on how do you remediate mold, and it's given according by size of area. You have a level 1, which is a small isolated area. You have level 2, which is mid-size isolated area, and level 3 and level 4. EPA recommends that for level 3 and level 4, you need to ensure that this is done by trained and certified workers that generally go through a 3 to 4 day training program in mold remediation. This is to ensure that not only the workers' health is safe, but also the safety of the building occupants. I wanted to point your attention to our colleagues at NIHH, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. They have a worker safety and health training resource program. A lot of amazing training resources available for free on this site. Now, since we're in COVID-19, it's important to also understand what potential disinfectants you may or may not be required to use in your home or in your building facility. And I wanted to give you access to EPA's website that contains all the various information on disinfectants, as well as information on drinking water and wastewater. So after the back-to-back hurricanes we experienced both in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, we very quickly realized that to address mold remediation and long-term recovery, we needed to look at the intersection of buildings, health, and indoor and outdoor environment. Why is it important to do that? Because it builds capacity on all levels It targets children, adults, healthcare providers, as well as workers. It creates sustainable new jobs. It addresses environmental health issues in an integrated manner. There's optimal utilization of funds. And it also ensures that Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands are better prepared for the long term. Some of our partners to date include various agencies from the federal, territory, and state sector, asthma health coalitions, academia, advisory groups and foundations, health and housing policy, nonprofits, community organizations, industry associations. After we were able to work closely with the enterprise community, we see them as a key partner in this effort, and we'd love to include the healthy home, the housing sector, as well as the Livable Housing organization. As I'd mentioned to you before, that when we're dealing with mold remediation, we need to address lead and asbestos as well, potentially as well. So as part of the capacity building effort in Puerto Rico last December, we held 6 mold, lead, asbestos awareness seminars that focused on providing the audience, which included people from universities, building managers of the various buildings, municipalities, private contractors, and local agencies. And what they heard is what are the current EPA regulations or guidelines that address mold, lead, and asbestos remediation. For Puerto Rico, there are specific regulations that are separate for lead and asbestos. So those were also presented. There was information provided on worker training requirements, what the average labor cost estimations would be, and also emphasizing how mold remediation is similar to lead abatement and asbestos remediation. And most importantly, it also highlighted the current training assets that exist in the Caribbean. I've provided a link here on the slide deck, which gives you access to all the various presentations that are available. So we know that anytime a disaster occurs, it's important not only for us to remediate our homes and buildings safely, but it's also a great opportunity to ensure that that the local workforce from those communities who have been unemployed, underemployed, are successfully trained so that we can raise the local workforce through job training and job placement. So as part of the Healthy Buildings Collaborative, we are focused on raising the local workforce in the renovation and rebuilding of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Amisha. Thank you, everyone. And these will be available after the call today, the recording and the slides. Now I'm so pleased to turn over to Jonathan Wilson, Director of the Center for National Center for Healthy Housing.
Thank you very much. And I just want to note that Laura gave me a promotion. I really appreciate that. My boss might not appreciate it, but
you deserve
I'm the
it.
Director. Thank you. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Center for Healthy Housing, and we have been working with Enterprise for a long time. Actually, we're a spinoff of Enterprise 27 years ago. We were called by Enterprise in 2005, September, when right after Katrina had hit the Gulf Coast in New Orleans, to look into the issue of whether those homes in New Orleans could be saved. These homes had been hit by the double whammy of both a hurricane and then what people call the unnatural disaster of the levees breaking. And homes had been sitting in many feet of water for over a month. And there was a question on whether they could be salvaged. You can see in the bottom picture here, a home that had mold up to the ceiling. All the furnishings had been covered with mold. And we were called in with university scientists and building professionals to try to figure out what we could do to salvage these homes. And you can see in the top left-hand picture, it's a little bit small, but you can see the yellow tripod in the front, which is mold testing device. And what we did when we went down there was we tested before, during, and after the work we were doing. And I can tell you that as far as what we'd expect with mold, we'd expect that outdoor levels would be 10,000 colony forming units, we'll just call it 10,000. Indoor levels will be a little less than that, hopefully a lot less than that. And when we were there, what did we find indoors? In this type of house, we found 1 million. It was extremely high levels. And again, we were unsure if we were ever going to be able to clean out these homes and bring them down to safe levels. But what we're able to do in test homes across the city was to practice a number of steps. And you can see one of the steps in the top right-hand corner, which included the clean out process. And Armand and I will be going through that process. And we were able to show that we could salvage these homes if it was structurally safe, if it had not been knocked off its piers, that these homes could be salvaged and could be returned to a state where people could move back in. And out of that came the creating a healthy home series with a flood guide for cleaning up your flooded home. It was a 20-page document. It was targeted toward homeowners, volunteer groups, and others. And we have had many groups use this in the flood since then that Laura was talking about to be able to address the problems in their home. Last year, we spoke with the US CDC, and they had interest in updating that document, bringing it online, and creating some e-learning modules that could help people when they're in disaster. So not only would they have the written copy, but they'd have some information they could get into in a little more depth from their personal computers to understand what was going on. There's 2 modules now. They're up on our website, elearning.nchh.org. They're part of the Safe Cleanup for Your Flood Damaged Home series. And the introductory module gets into the basic steps of what you need to do before you start the cleanup process. And then the second module gets into a step-by-step guidance on what you need to do. And Armin and I will be talking about that for the rest of the series. In addition, a about 4-minute awareness video was created. And we hope that people that are working with folks in flood ravaged areas will use this video and share it widely to encourage people to gain access to our materials, especially the e-learning documents. And I think it offers a nice introductory teaser on what really needs to be done for cleanup. And as I said, we have the 2 modules, the Safe Cleanup for Your Flood Damaged Home. And these are approximately 25 to 35 minute long. Second one is the 8 steps to clean up flood homes safely. When Armin and I have worked on this, we've actually sort of streamlined this down to 5. So we're going to be talking about 5 steps coming up shortly. But if you break it down a little bit further for your homeowner, they may need to have a few more discrete steps. We broke it down to 8 steps, and I think it's very doable as long as you take those practical steps and take care of your personal protection well. And then we updated our guides. And so we now have 2 guides available, one in English, one in Spanish. They are on our website. You can see our short bit.ly sites as well. You can go to get this. So nch.org or the bit.ly sites here. And as I understand it, these slides will be shared with you if you don't have time to copy all this down. So Armin and I are now going to go through some of the highlights of the guide and what we've learned, and then open it up for questions after that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. turning over to Armand, just to let everyone know, if you're having issues seeing the slides, just type in the chat and we'll try to address that.
All right, are my slides up?
Yes.
Excellent. So hello, everyone. I'm Armand Magnelli, and or Magnelli, as Laurie sometimes pronounces so graciously in the lovely Italian dialect. This is the agenda for the section of this presentation that Jonathan and I are going to cover together. When we typically talk about this kind of program, it's often after hurricane season. Today we're talking to you before hurricane season, so we wanted to do something that was a little more about helping folks anticipate what could happen if you haven't been through a natural disaster such as this. In addition to talking about best practices, we want to talk about what to expect. We're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about best practices, but we also want to spend a little bit of time at the end talking about how to do some planning, and we'll do that at 3 different levels. So, getting right into it, we're going to talk about what to expect in the initial weeks after the disaster for 3 population groups: for residents, people living in units within the affected area; for organizations supporting communities, for instance, like the nonprofit organizations and community groups that might be working within a disaster area; and for the community at large. So everyone knows that there are many hazards that folks are subjected to after disaster, and specifically after flooding disaster. So mold is at the top of everyone's list of things to be concerned about. And as Jonathan said, there are times during the recovery process when the number of mold spores in the air are just amazing. Million mold spores in per cubic meter is not unusual, and that's the levels they found post-Katrina. But there are other issues as well, and we've heard previously: lead paint, asbestos, sewage. Sadly, flooding events particularly have the tendency to include sewage in the floodwater, which the bacteria that's involved there is extremely risky. Lots of chemicals also can be in the floodwaters. And after Harvey in Houston, because of all the industrial uses in that area, there are quite a number of chemicals that were likely to be found. And then as we take buildings apart, as we go back into homes, there are all kinds of other types of hazards that may have been there previously. Let's say birds nesting in an attic or other animals, and suddenly their nests are exposed, as are the hazards related to nesting animals. Pigeons are particularly dangerous in terms of the chemicals and the toxins that are in the nesting areas for pigeons. So I mentioned those on the slide. But then we start running into other problems. Folks go back into homes without the appropriate kind of personal hygiene, personal protective equipment. As a nation, we've gotten quite an education about personal protective equipment, PPE, with the COVID pandemic. And I don't have to explain that word so much anymore, that acronym. And then, of course, another hazard is the risks for physical injury. Folks overexert themselves. There's risks of shock, electrical shock, and cuts. And cuts are particularly dangerous with all the other kinds of contaminants that are present. So lots of potential health and safety hazards following a disaster. And households, we find, have very different needs and face different hazards. Income levels, sadly, are a predictor to how families and households are affected. So obviously the level of damage in the home can vary quite a bit. Some folks have existing health conditions, which makes recovery more difficult and increases the number of hazards that they face. Some folks are less apt at dealing with the bureaucracy after an event like this. And, you know, for folks that need the support, there's a certain level of regulatory oversight that needs to be dealt with. Some folks have competing problems as well. You know, a household may have lost its automobile during a storm, and boy, that can complicate life. So all of these things contribute to how difficult situations are for residents after such a disaster. And sad to say, support can be inconsistent. And so to some degree, we're going to pitch the idea that everyone should, to some degree, start to plan for themselves and prepare for disasters if they think there's some chance. And focus on the first 72 hours. That seems to be a good milestone for folks to consider. How will you protect yourself and your family and your household for those first 72 hours if you can't get support from others? And there's lots of different things to consider there. We'll get into that more towards the end. But you need to anticipate as an occupant, as a resident, that recovery is going to be a challenge. And while there will be people coming to help, good to be prepared on your own. I went one too far. These are two homes in Texas on the Gulf. These are homes that are right next to each other. And this is an example of how the housing stock itself can create very different situations. The home on the left, wood-sided on concrete block piers, suffered much more damage than the home on the right. They both suffered damage, sadly. The home on the right has a more cement board siding and was built on a slab. And while they were both flooded, the type of housing, the type of foundation you have, the type of construction is another variable that affects how much damage there is, and to some degree, what the level of health hazards might be. So switching from what residents can expect in the situations at the level of the homes for residents, for both owners and renters, what should organizations expect? If your organization is one that is focused on helping your community survive and thrive, thinking about business continuity is a really important step. How will you manage after a disaster? How will you harness your systems after a disaster to help your clientele? One of the first things that we suggest organizations do is really think about which priority business functions will be key for you to help deliver, and then based on that, what will it take for you to continue to provide those kinds of functions? Another thing that organizations need to think about is how will their employees be able to help? It's likely the employees will be local and have their own issues in their own households. So being cognizant of that and supportive of their needs is an important step for organization. One of the biggest issues, of course, is communication, maintaining lines of communication within the organization, and also having access to records. So think of those as issues that you may need to address. We'll get into planning a little bit later for this as well. But communities at large, we know public systems will be disrupted: power, water, transportation, trash hauling. Local businesses and services may not be available for weeks. Communication systems may be compromised. And some agencies with supportive services will be closed. So thinking through how the community at large will be affected is also important before disaster. So now Jonathan and I will, with that conclusion of that section here about what are the things that people, organizations and communities should be anticipating. Let's talk through the best practices for recovery. We like to think of this in a series of steps that are fairly linear. And so because we are most concerned about the people, the first thing we talk about is protection. How to protect people as they go back into the homes and try to do cleanup work. And this could be the owners, the occupants, workers, anyone involved. And so protection is first. We'll talk about that in length. The second step is cleaning. And cleaning for us means a broad range of activities. In part, cleaning out residences of different materials that have been affected by flood waters, and figuring out what can be salvaged, and then cleaning the structure itself. And the good news here is that this cleaning step, while it is fairly involved and there are many components to it, it is fairly straightforward, and it does use pretty standard cleaning methods. And we'll talk about that in detail. Sometimes it is important to use chemical treatments, and we'll go over that a bit. Jonathan actually will be covering that in detail. And this is something that occasionally is useful. I will say our belief is that folks tend to overuse chemicals to some degree after a natural disaster. We'll talk specifically about where we see the value. And my gosh, this is possibly the most important step to focus on in some ways, because so often people in the rush to get back into their homes do not dry out the home sufficiently. We'll talk about this as well. And then finally, we do like to think about these disasters as something of an opportunity. There are few times in the life cycle of a home when you have the opportunity to do some major improvements. And these situations sometimes do give us the opportunity to improve the home to a different kind of standard. So this is going to go fairly quickly. Please record questions in the chat. I'm going to start by talking about the protection section. When points of exposure that we have to be concerned about, certainly when anyone returns to the home after a flooding event to inspect the damage, there's risk of exposure to all kinds of things. People need to be protected. Sadly, this is post-Katrina in the 9th Ward, and this person should have had somewhat better protection. Whenever we get in and start disturbing materials inside the home, mold spore counts go through the roof. Anytime we disturb stuff and start moving stuff, there's a serious concern at that stage for exposure to all kinds of contaminants. During cleanout, this is not the level of personal protection that this person has, which is essentially boots, is not sufficient. We're going to recommend quite a bit more in terms of personal protection. During the construction phase, you may recognize this dapper young man in full PPE, and can't see his feet, but they're well protected also. During construction phase, we need quite a bit of personal protection. And then, of course, living in the building, there are risks if people have not done a great job of cleaning the building. Living in the building post-construction, post-recovery can be very dangerous. Some personal protective equipment that we'll talk about here. I want to say that there's quite a bit more detail about PPE in both the documents that Lori and Jonathan mentioned before. And we suggest that whenever you're involved in a home post disaster, respirators are extremely important. The illustration on the left top shows a paper mask. People are very familiar with these days. We suggest an N95 or N100 is only really sufficient protection if you use it for very brief periods of time, and also when you're not disturbing mold. There is the possibility that immediately after disaster, if you can get into the house before mold begins to grow, and we generally say within 24 to 48 hours of a flooding event with no evidence of mold, then these can be sufficient. But even in that case, we would recommend using at a minimum the paper respirators. For actually doing any kind of work or any other conditions, if you do not have a beard, the vinyl respirators with the replaceable cartridges are preferred. And then finally, if you have a beard, such as some of us do, then you need to get fancy, because beards do not work well with either of the other types of respirators. Here we suggest the powered air purifying respirator, PAPR, is because you are fully protected even if you have facial hair. Jonathan, what have you seen people using in the field?
Well, this is a unique time. So as you said earlier, Armand, people didn't really understand much about N95s until maybe 2 months ago. Now we learned a lot more about this. In a normal time, you can find N95s and the half-face respirators at a home, the big box home improvement stores, some of the small box home improvement stores. And so often these were accessible. Now, what were people using? Often they were using a paper mask that's even below N95. So we're trying to get people to move up, and hopefully the recognition of COVID is going to make people more aware of the hazards of what's in the air and using these better. With what people call PAPRs, these are much more expensive. They're harder to find. And so I think that it tends to be the commercial businesses that tend to use those more. And you do see some folks who have beards who are trying to wear the others. They're just not that effective when you've got a beard on.
And I'm not shaving, Jonathan.
We hear that too.
Yeah. All right. So regardless of the device, they should be fitted well if they are one of the first two types, and please do read the instructions. They are important. We're not going to get into much more detail about personal protection. Again, there's great detail in the documents that both Lori and Jonathan shared. Let's jump into clean. Jonathan, you and I can share the responsibilities here, but these are the components of this cleaning phase that we refer to. There's first of all the cleaning out of debris. There's the second of all flooded belongings, and this covers a wide range of things. Damaged fixtures, this could be appliances, plumbing fixtures, and then removing affected finishes, whether they be floor finishes, wall finishes, or ceiling finishes. And then also, finally, when we have the building cleared out, cleaning the surfaces and in some cases disinfecting. We like folks to focus on prepping, getting prepared before they do any work. So, simple things like making sure you've got all the tools and supplies you'll need, and making sure that the utilities are turned off. Gas and electricity can be quite hazardous if they're still on in buildings. And think ahead about trash removal and things as basic as bathroom access. And you may need to set up temporary electricity. This may require a generator. Even if it's only for lights and charging cordless tools, it's very important. One of the biggest hazards after emergencies like a flood event or a hurricane is folks that are running generators indoors, gas-fired generators indoors, and creating carbon monoxide hazards. This suggests that we should all know how to turn the gas service off and where the main breaker is on the electrical panel. We also really like the idea of setting up a safety and cleanup area for workers before people start to work. And this should be outside the building in a very safe, secure area. And it's very simple, straightforward, but the idea is if someone's going to work for a while, they're going to need to take breaks. We suggest regular breaks are a very good idea. You want folks to be able to clean up quickly in case they want to drink something, have a snack. They don't want to be handling food or drinks with contaminated hands. You need to be able to clean up. You need a supply of fresh, clean water, and certainly first aid kits are crucial. Before we start work, we should be thinking about separating the unaffected areas of a home from the affected areas. If it's a two-story home, the second floor may have been much less affected. Sealing off areas that are unaffected is really a good idea so that you don't spread contaminants and mold spores everywhere. And then think through a ventilation strategy. Ultimately, we need to dry out the building, but as people are going into work, we want a good supply of fresh air, and we want to make sure that we have a ventilation strategy that's going to supply fresh air and not send contaminated air to unaffected sections of the home. So, for instance, thinking through which way air will be drawn into a home. In the illustration, you can see there's an exhaust fan on the first floor, exhausting air out of this home, drawing air from areas above so that those are not affected. Those areas are not affected. Simple concept, but very important. So don't forget to air out the building. These are the steps we suggest for cleaning. Remove small furniture and objects on the floor. Then remove large furniture, followed by appliances. And then if there's wall-to-wall carpet, certainly removing them. We suggest doing that in narrow strips about 3 feet wide. Then cleaning out closet shelves, storage area, kitchen cabinets, and possibly shoveling out mud. And depending on the building, the situation, that removal of mud, you may need to clear a path earlier in this process in order to make it safe. The home makeover shows love to show people with sledgehammers knocking down walls. We do not think this is a good way to remove wall finishes, ceiling finishes, floor finishes. Very dangerous. This is not what we recommend. There's likely to be electrical, plumbing, HVAC components inside the walls that could be damaged by using sledgehammers. You could also create structural problems if you don't know what you're doing. And we suggest strongly that if you're removing wall finishes or ceiling finishes or floor finishes, try to remove things in larger sections. Sledgehammers just pulverize plaster and drywall into small pieces, which makes it much more difficult to clean up. Trying to cut drywall into sections for removal is much smarter, much more efficient. And so another series of things to think about in terms of after we've cleaned out the building, if we are going to start removing finishes and fixtures, start with damaged cabinets, shelving, doors, and trim. Kitchen cabinets would be high on the list here if they were soaked with floodwaters. They're probably not restorable. And then after that, we would suggest removing trim. It makes it much easier to remove wall finishes. And we're talking about baseboard, door, and window casings. We think that removing the ceilings next is very smart, because then you're not getting all the debris from the ceilings into the wall cavities. If you got the wall cavities first, you end up having to clean out sections that you may have cleaned previously. You'll notice that the worker in this illustration is on a ladder and has a spotter and is trying to push sections of ceiling off from above and down. This is much safer than standing underneath the ceiling while you're addressing ceiling finishes. And key component here, remove some level of material and then clean up afterwards so that you don't end up with a room full of debris. Next, we would suggest removing the wall finishes if you need to, and clean up as you go. Remove insulation if there is any in the walls, and then address floor layers that have been affected. And then finally, this is a good time for a really thorough cleaning of dirt and debris to get down to the bare frame of the building. You'll notice in these photos, this was post-Harvey on the Gulf Coast. One of the big issues is how much should be removed. One of the main strategies is to remove up to 4 foot from the floor when you're dealing with walls. And the strategy there is you could go back with one sheet of drywall. They're typically 4 feet wide. And so it does limit to some degree the amount of gutting that you might have to do. But oftentimes, even though water levels may not have reached that high, there may be mold inside those wall cavities. So don't reflexively buy into that 4 foot wall rule with wall finishes. Inspect inside the wall cavities. In this house, there was damp fiberglass insulation above this remaining drywall. And we also found evidence of mold growing up inside the wall cavities. So just don't assume that you've addressed all the risks by going up 4 feet. Dealing with post-disaster debris is a big deal. This is an illustration off of the FEMA website. They have some very good information there. Certainly you want to check with your municipality as you begin putting debris at the curb. Most times after one of these events, there is a community-wide pickup of materials that's available. And this strongly suggests separating things so that it makes it easier for people removing materials. Laurie, I'm aware of the time, and I'm going as quick as I can. I know we're likely to go over a little bit here. And also, we suggest being very cautious and trying to keep kids from playing on these piles of debris. Hope everybody recognizes this truly mythical character. This is Yoda from Star Wars. It's one of the famous sayings from Yoda: you must unlearn what you have learned. Here we're going to talk a little bit about the science behind post-flood cleaning. I'm going to leave this to Jonathan. He's well prepared to deal with this. We recommend some very specific methodologies behind with post-flood cleanup. Jonathan, you want to take it from here?
Great. So I think that this is one of the biggest changes we had from the first version of our guide to the one that we put out this past fall. And we got a lot of great guidance from advisors when we were putting together the revisions, including Claudette Reichel from LSU, who helped put together a document for HUD called Rebuild Healthy Homes. And we all came to the conclusion that you need to be very clear that cleaning and disinfecting are two different steps. That cleaning first maximizes the effectiveness, that you're not going to have a very effective disinfectant if you've got dirty surfaces. The disinfectant will burn itself out on that dirt. And so you need to clean first. And in many cases, we find that it's actually satisfactory just to clean. That if you've got a wall cavity that you're cleaning out, that by using soaps or surfactants, that you're able to remove that mold, you're able to remove the dirt, and you can then be done. And after you've dried out that wall, you can walk away without having to put any harmful disinfectants into the environment. Go ahead. So, that's the point I was just making, that you can avoid adding potential disinfectants. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. In some cases where you've got the bacteria and you can deal with non-porous surfaces, they should be cleaned and disinfected. And it is 2 steps. You also may have situations where you have a highly allergic participant of the household, resident of the household. And in that case, you want to not only remove that mold, but you want to denature anything that's there. And so you may do extra disinfection to actually kill and denature the mold. So it's not going to cause allergies and potentially asthma effects and triggers. There are products out there that mix cleaners, and we're all looking for the cheapest and most efficient step. We do not recommend this. We recommend buying separate products, using them the way they're meant to be used, and that is the best way to do it. And as Amisha was talking about, EPA has a great website on and as well as the labels you find on disinfectants all have to be approved by EPA. And they tell you how long it has to be on the surface, what's it killing. It is really important to be reading the directions of what's going on in these products. We know that people often don't do that. We know in New Orleans, for example, they used to call bleach the holy water. They just spray it everywhere. That is not the practice that we encourage. We want you to be safe and use these as sensitive products as they are. Disinfectants are killing biologicals, and they can be dangerous to people as well as the mold and to the bacteria. I'm going to go a little faster on this, Armin. I'm just going to say that some people like to see treatments after the fact. Our recommendation is if you've cleaned properly, if you've disinfected properly, it's not necessarily necessary to use special treatments, especially some of these paints that are just going to bind in. The potentially, if you left a little water in, you could trap in some water, and it could be a problem with mold rot later on. So we do have one product that we think it could be used. Borates are biostats. They're like birth control for mold. So after you've completed the job, you apply these, allow them to dry, and then close up your walls. And I would say that's something to consider, but not mandatory for each job. Something that if you want that extra protection, if you know that you've got a place that gets wet frequently, then use these products. We have one example on the next slide. We're not endorsing it, but it is something that people have used successfully for mold. It also has pesticide benefits, but you cannot be applying this for that reason, because then you need to be a pest control operator. So be cautious about that, understand the rules in your state, and then move forward from there. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Armand.
All right. So we've seen, one thing I would like to add about the application of the borates, Jonathan, is that they are, one of the reasons we like them is because they are simple to apply. They generally come either in a powder or a liquid that you then mix in a pump sprayer. It's a pretty simple thing to apply, fairly safe. So just an extra note there. I mentioned before how important drying out the building is. Think right from the beginning, start thinking about how you're going to dry the building out. If you're in a hot, humid climate, this can be a challenge. And it's also true that if it happens, if you have a hurricane such as Sandy right at the onset of winter, that also creates problems for drying out buildings. But if possible, make good use of natural ventilation, and again, think about the direction of airflow. There are some commercial dehumidifiers available that can be very helpful in drying out buildings. These are often tough to come by after an event because they're in great demand, but they do speed the process. And we have examples here of large commercial dehumidifiers and also an air scrubber that actually pulls particulate out of the air. Ultimately, though, what we want to make sure that especially the wood components of the building are dried down to no more than a 15% moisture content. Mold can reoccur inside these wall cavities if you don't get these sections of the building dry enough before you apply new finishes. Really important point. So that does suggest that having a moisture meter would be a good thing to have. Just a couple thoughts about improving buildings. When you're thinking about replacing things, think about installing components that have a longer life cycle, things that are more resistant to moisture damage, things that contain fewer contaminants. Volatile organic compounds like formaldehydes are not good. And checking to see if the paints you're using are low VOC is very smart. Think about putting things that will require less maintenance. It's more likely the building will be sustainable and resilient if it requires less maintenance. It's also an opportunity to put in better equipment, such as heating and cooling equipment that is more efficient. Mechanical systems in general that are more efficient are useful. And even in areas like the Virgin Islands where heating and cooling is not such an issue, they are very concerned about water usage, and so more efficient water using fixtures are a good idea almost everywhere. So things to consider: specific approaches in terms of improving the building. Bathroom and kitchen ventilation is important. Thinking about better insulation and air sealing using low VOC products, which I mentioned already. Upgrading HVAC and domestic water equipment, hot water equipment. Better finishes, things that are more durable, water resistant, easily cleaned are all very good ideas. And then to wrap up our section here, I'm going to run through very quickly some things that each of these three groups can do to prepare better for disasters. Residents should be consider the P's, personal needs, FEMA, CDC. Lots of organizations have checklists of things that you can use to help prepare for emergencies. Think about things like medical prescriptions that you may need to be stocked up on in advance of an event, important paper work, having access to things like deeds for property and personal identification information, having either paper copies that you can quickly take with you, or even having things on a flash drive or with a relative someplace would be a good thing to do. But thinking about what are we going to need in terms of important paperwork after a disaster. Think about power sources, what batteries, chargers. Is it as simple? It's as simple as, does the car have gas in it sometimes? And there are many apps out there. FEMA has emergency alert apps that you can install on your phone, which can be handy in an emergency. Simple thing to do. Organizations, think about thinking about how you're going to help your staff prepare their households for an emergency so they can be unburdened by the disaster as quickly as possible and able to help others. What essential services will you want to be able to provide to your communities? What will you need to provide those services, and how are you going to get those things in place in advance of an event? Certainly connecting with your local emergency management organization, creating a relationship with them, and participating in their planning events would be a very smart thing to do. Ultimately, it is really important for you to know as well what other organizations will be able to prepare, deliver, provide, and what you can provide, and what that matrix of services looks like. The community as a whole.
Ron, we have some questions coming in, so from the audience, we just want to make sure we can get to them in time.
Okay, so this is my last slide, I think. Community should be making sure that the chain of command is, that people are aware of that. What are the community assets? Who can do what? How to identify and publicize the credible sources of information, of emergency management information in advance. Make sure those are highlighted in the media, and promote this idea of knowing your neighbors, both to help them and to know how they can help you. And with that, I'm done. Yeah, we're a few minutes over.
Armand, Jonathan, Amisha, thank you so much. This is a full day class that Armand and Jonathan gives, and they were able to do it in half an hour. So couple things before we wrap up, because I realize we're going over everyone, but we've got a lot of folks interested in, specifically from Puerto Rico. I'm so happy to see my good friend, Dr. Fernando Bruña, on the call, and he wanted to know specifically, and this is important for our colleagues in Puerto Rico, how do you deal with concrete block walls with cavities that cannot be reached after a flooding event? What would you say, Armand, would be the cleaning procedures and mold remediation for those particular topologies?
Yeah, it's a tough situation. The hollow cores of concrete block, certainly it's possible for all kinds of contaminants to be in there. Fortunately, if the interior wall finish is intact, they may not be accessible. Those things may not be accessible to indoors, but certainly the drying step, making sure that wall assemblies, whether they're concrete block or wood frame, are dried out as best you can, is an important strategy. Jonathan may have something to add there. I don't think it is practical to try to apply any kind of chemical to the interior of concrete block cores, though. I don't think that's sensible. And in places like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, there should be a solid concrete beam at the top of the wall, so you wouldn't really have access anyway. Jonathan, do you have anything to add?
That was a great answer. I'm going to leave it there.
Cutting into the wall, making a space for more airflow.
It's you could try that certainly for drying purposes, but you're also that creates another repair that you need to make, and the way the concrete block cores are assembled in construction, you would have to create a lot of holes. It doesn't seem practical to me. Yeah.
And I think there would be structural risk at a certain point.
Yeah. I'd be afraid that people will get a little carried away.
Dr. Abruznia is one of the great minds in Puerto Rico on green design and construction. So Dr. Abruznia, this would be a good design challenge to deal with. Another question that came in that's worth noting, because this is an issue that does come up, and I know that we see it in a lot of communities. In the old days, they used to boil clothing to clean the clothing after a cleanup. How would one do that? I mean, is there any non-chemical way to treat protective equipment, or is the answer no?
Jonathan, you want to do that one?
So, I think that there's probably a lot to unpack in that question. We've heard a lot about the fact that your N95 masks are designed for single use, and that they've gotten creative in how to use them multiple times in this COVID crisis. That's not the ideal. That's not how they were designed. And we will soon learn how well they hold up with these cleaning practices, and possibly it will work well, and they will become new practices for other businesses as well as flood cleanup. So we have been following recommendations, and those recommendations are these masks are single use. Now, if you're talking about your half-face respirator, then those are meant to be cleanable. That's an advantage of using them. And then switching out the canisters on them is the approach that we've taken to keep those safe.
And as far as clothing goes, soap and water does a great job. I mean, soap and water, we're huge proponents of soap and water. Very good idea. Now, if there's chemical spills, that's entirely different.
Or if what you're referring to is a Tyvek suit, again, that's similar to the fabric
Yeah.
we'll be talking about for an N95 mask.
Yeah, but Tyvek suits are considered disposable, and they're fairly expensive, especially if they're bought in bulk. And that's another thing that communities could be thinking about, would be getting those kinds of supplies in advance.
Hi, this is Amisha. I just wanted to quickly add that EPA just recently launched internally a research effort to look at how best to clean personal protective equipment, so that we would have some information, down the road, and we can make specific recommendations about that.
Thank you, Misha. One question coming in, I know we do have to wrap up, but this is important, and this is a testament to the importance of this issue. Question, is there a point of no return where you really don't have any options at cleaning or mold remediation? Which criteria do you use? And that makes me reflect on stories coming out of Houston after Harvey, where weeks went by before housing was treated, and the question residents and homeowners had to ask is, when does this become a tear down? How do I deal with this?
So I think what we found in New Orleans was that if it's structural, then it's a tear down. If there's other things going on, that you have a site that's so contaminated with other things, then it becomes a process that you may not be able to recover. But we saw some very badly mold-ridden homes, and we were able to get those down to a level that our scientists felt, we're with. I mean, there are no federal standards. There's no international standards for mold. So it's not as though you can say this is a safe place and this is an unsafe place. But you can say, what do people live in a normal time on a day-to-day basis, and they can usually live a healthy life. And you can say, if we can get it down to that level, then it's a safe place to, relatively safe place to live. And even when we had those mold spores of over 1 million while we were cleaning out, we were able to achieve that. Now, I think that there is a distinction between some of the molds we talk about and wood rot, which is a form of mold. And again, that's a structural issue. So if you've got wood rot that's causing the home not to be able to be stable, then it may not be able to save. But that may be a longer term issue than what you just encountered from the flood. It's something that you've had water in that home for a long time, and that's the problem.
I'd echo that. In my experience in housing rehabilitation of vacant structures, it is encouraging what we can salvage. And housing rehabilitation is one of the greenest things we can do for the environment. So have an expert look to make sure that it's the building structurally sound, and then start assessing whether or not you can get it clean enough. And I would echo Jonathan's sentiment. It's surprising how well cleaning can work. We didn't talk a lot about vacuuming, but vacuuming with a HEPA vacuum after you've cleaned buildings out is also a very good idea to get rid of any remaining mold spores. You want to say anything about that, Jonathan?
Again, I think people are much more aware about HEPA than they were 3 months ago, but it's a filtering system that doesn't let anything but the smallest air particles out of the bag, so that you can trap in these fragments of mold, and so you're not releasing them into the environment and creating a contaminated site. You may have mold in your wall. By clean this out, then you've created a safer place long term. So I think it's definitely a good strategy.
Thank you, Armand. Thank you, Jonathan and Amisha. I want to close out with a couple announcements before we. So a couple things. One is you will all get the copy of the presentation and the video after this. We will also send you links to the Contractor's Guide for Mold Remediation, as well as Keep Safe. On our call today, I'm happy that everyone participated in the poll that we sent around. We were Puerto Rico, the VI, and Southeast were the top regions on the call today, followed by the Gulf Coast. We also had a combination of homeowners and code officials on the call today, as well as nonprofits. We heard from you that you're interested in flood and earthquake as the top disasters, so we will make sure we build our program going forward this summer to your needs. I also want to mention that next week on Monday at 3 p.m., we are going to be hosting a public webinar with FEMA to talk about FEMA's role during the hurricane season as well as with COVID. And we're really excited about that because it'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. That will be available in Spanish as well as in English simultaneously. The last thing I'll note is a little bit of a treat for everyone who stayed online with us so far is a new tool fresh off the plate that Enterprise is putting out the next couple of weeks. It's called Portfolio Protect. You can plug in your address anywhere in the US and Puerto Rico and the VI, and you'll come up with a risk rating to find out what your risk exposure is going to be to climate and natural hazards. So that's a little treat for those of you that stayed with us through this. And we'll send that out as well, and we'll probably do something on that. We look forward to seeing you throughout the summer. This is a really critical issue, so I would welcome everyone to send us information, questions. We will be sending you information, like I said, the information from the EPA, the information from Livable Housing, as well as the National Center for Healthy Housing and Enterprise. We want to make sure our community, which is you, is connected has resources and can access everything. With further ado, I want to thank our amazing teachers for coming together on June 1st, 2020, start of Atlantic hurricane season. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that your next few weeks are safe and you keep healthy.
Thank you, Lori.
Same to everyone else.